was a Sunday afternoon, 12:47 p.m., Golden Spoon Restaurant, 5th Avenue, New York City. One of the most expensive dining rooms in the country. White tablecloths, crystal glasses, a waiting list 3 weeks long, and in the middle of all of it, an old man in a worn jacket was being dragged toward the door. Not escorted, not asked politely, dragged. The manager's hand gripped his arm, pulling him through the dining room, past every table, past every guest, past every person who had stopped eating to watch. The old man did not fight back. He did not shout. He did not say a single word. He just walked, head down, shoulders forward. The walk of a man who has been told his whole life that he does not belong in certain rooms. And the manager's voice followed him all the way to the door, loud enough for the entire restaurant to hear, every single word. You people never learn, do you? The dining room went completely silent. This is Golden Spoon, 5th Avenue, New York City. She said it the way people say things they want engraved somewhere. This is not a shelter. This is not a soup kitchen. This is not somewhere you walk in off the street because your feet are tired. She stopped at the door, turned him to face the room, like she wanted everyone to see. Look around you. Her voice was ice. What one table spends on a single meal here, she looked at his jacket, his shoes, his empty hands, is more than your entire generation will ever earn. Someone near the window shifted in their seat. She wasn't finished. Filthy, presumptuous, embarrassing. She pushed the door open with one hand. Cold January air rushed in. There are cafes down the street for people like you, people who know their place. Go find one. The old man stood at the open door. He looked at her once, just once. The look of a man who has survived things she will never understand. Then he looked at the floor and walked out into the cold. The door swung shut behind him. The manager smoothed her jacket, turned back to the dining room, smiled at the guests like a performance had just concluded. Brandon, the waiter, started a slow clap from the service station. 2 people smiled. The room exhaled and went back to their meals. What nobody in that restaurant knew was that in less than 15 minutes, her reputation, her career, her future, everything would collapse in front of everyone. Not because of a complaint, not because of a review, not because of anything they could have predicted or prepared for, but because of a phone call. One single phone call, made by a man standing on 5th Avenue in a worn jacket in the January cold, who had not said a single word inside that restaurant. Not one. Because he didn't need to. He already knew everything he needed to know. And the people inside had absolutely no idea who the manager just humiliated and put out in the cold. Before we go any further, I need to ask you something. Have you ever been judged the moment you walked into a room? Before you opened your mouth? Before anyone knew your name? Before you had a single chance to show them who you actually were? If yes, drop yes in the comments right now. If no, drop no. Because what is about to happen in this story is for every single person who has ever been told, without words, or sometimes with them, that they do not belong. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this one. Now, let's go back to the beginning of that Sunday and understand exactly what happened inside Golden Spoon before we tell you who walked out of it. Golden Spoon Fine Dining, the flagship location, 5th Avenue, New York City, 41 years old. There were 23 locations now across 6 states, but this one was the original, the first, the one that started everything. White tablecloths laundered and pressed every single morning, crystal glasses polished by hand before every service, a wine cellar with bottles that cost more than most people's monthly rent, a sommelier who had trained in Paris, a head chef who had been written about in 11 publications, a waiting list that ran 3 weeks on a slow month and 6 weeks in December.
The kind of restaurant where the lighting was designed to make everything look like a painting, where the music was low enough to feel but not hear, where the staff moved through the room like they had been choreographed, and where, if you were paying attention, the welcome you received at the door depended entirely on what you looked like when you arrived. That Sunday, the dining room was full. Couples celebrating, business lunches running long into the afternoon, a family marking something important in the corner booth, a food journalist at a solo table by the window, notebook open beside her bread plate. The room hummed, crystal and conversation and the soft percussion of a Sunday in one of the finest restaurants in the city. And then, at 12:47 p.m., the front door opened. The old man walked alone, no reservation, no companion, nothing in his hands. He was in his late 70s. His jacket was dark wool, worn at the elbows, the kind that had been good quality once and had simply been worn too many winters to show it anymore. His shirt underneath was pale blue, collar open, slightly soft from years of washing. His pants were dark and clean. His shoes were black, scuffed at the toe. He walked slowly, not because he was unwell, because he had reached the age and the place inside himself where he had stopped being in a hurry for anything. He stopped at the host stand. The hostess looked up, took him in, all of him, in less than 3 seconds. "Do you have a reservation?" she asked. Her tone was not quite rude. It was something more calculated than rude. The tone of someone who has already decided the answer before they asked the question. "I don't," he said pleasantly. "I was hoping you might have a table available." She looked at her screen. The restaurant had 4 open tables. "We're fully committed this afternoon," she said. He nodded. "I don't mind waiting. I'm in no rush." She looked at him again. The jacket, the shoes, the nothing in his hands. "I can put you on the wait list," she said. "That would be kind," he said. She wrote a name on her clipboard, Hargrove. She did not ask him to spell it. She did not look up when she wrote it. She gestured to a small bench near the coat room. He sat, folded his hands in his lap, and waited. He was good at waiting. He had been waiting his whole life. 15 minutes later, a table opened. The hostess led him through the dining room, past the window tables, past the good corner booth, past the warm center of the room where the lighting was best and the noise was just right, all the way to the back, to the table by the kitchen door, the one that caught the draft every time a server pushed through, the one that shook slightly when the dishwasher ran, the one where the lighting was a shade too harsh and the noise from the kitchen was a shade too loud. The table nobody wanted. He sat down without comment, straightened the napkin in his lap, looked at the menu. A waiter arrived. His name was Brandon, 28 years old, sharp-looking, the kind of confidence that comes from never having had a reason not to be. He looked at the old man the way people look at things they have already categorized. He did not say good afternoon. He did not introduce himself. He did not offer water. "You ready to order?" he said. The old man looked up. "Good afternoon," he said. Brandon did not return it. He held his notepad, pen ready, expression that said, "I have other tables. Could I start with some still water, please, and perhaps a moment with the menu?" Brandon wrote nothing. "The lunch menu's on the back," he said. Then he turned and walked away. The old man turned the menu over, looked at it, looked at the room. 5 minutes passed. No water came. 10 minutes. He caught Brandon's eye across the restaurant. Brandon looked at a point just past him and kept moving. The old man set the menu down, folded his hands on the table, and waited. He had been patient his whole life. He could be patient a little longer. Her name was Diane Carver, 41 years old, branch manager for 3 years, the kind of manager who had learned to run a room but had never learned why the room existed. She had received 4 complaints about this location in the past 6 months. She had dismissed all 4. Difficult customers, she had told corporate. people who didn't understand fine dining, people who expected too much. She was wrong about all four. She saw the old man from across the room at 1:06 p.m. She saw the table he had been given. She saw the menu sitting untouched. She saw that no water had been brought. None of that concerned her. What concerned her was the jacket. She walked over, stood at the edge of the table, looked at him the way someone looks at something that doesn't belong on a surface she is responsible for. "Good afternoon," the old man said. She did not return it. "I'm going to need to ask you a few questions." "Of course," he said. "Are you a guest of someone dining with us today?" "No," he said. "I'm dining alone." She looked at the jacket again. "Are you familiar with our reservation policy?" "I was placed on the wait list by your hostess. She seated me when a table became available."
Diane looked at the hostess stand across the room. The hostess looked back with the expression of someone who was no longer sure they had made the right call. Diane looked back at the old man. "This is a fine dining establishment," she said. Her voice had dropped, the particular drop that precedes something that is meant to humiliate quietly. "We have standards." "I understand," he said. "Standards of presentation," she said. "Standards of," she gestured at him, "appearance." The old man said nothing. "I don't think this is the right environment for you this afternoon," she said. "I'm quite comfortable," he said. Something changed in her face. The quiet approach had not worked. She straightened, and then her voice went up, not down, up, loud enough for the tables nearest them to hear, then loud enough for the tables beyond that, then loud enough for the whole room. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The table nearby went quiet. "Sir," she said the word like it tasted wrong. "This restaurant is not," she paused for effect, looking around at the white tablecloths and crystal glasses, "this kind of place." He looked up at her. His eyes were steady, calm. "I'm not sure I understand," he said quietly. "Then let me be clear." She reached down and took his arm, not gently. Her hand closed around his forearm, and she pulled, the way you pull something you want moved, and he rose from his chair because there was nothing else to do. The room went silent, not gradually, immediately. Every conversation stopped. Every fork went still. Every face turned. She walked him through the dining room, past every table, past every face, past every person who had stopped breathing to watch. And she talked the entire way, loud, deliberate, performing for the room. "You people never learn, do you?" His head went down. "This is Golden Spoon, Fifth Avenue, New York City." His shoulders folded forward. "This is not a shelter. This is not a soup kitchen. This is not somewhere you walk into off the street because your feet are tired." He said nothing. He just walked, the walk of a man absorbing something he has no defense against. Because what do you say? What do you say when someone has decided what you are, and nothing you own in that moment can prove them wrong? At the door, she stopped. She turned him to face the room, every eye on him, every table watching. "Look around you." Her voice filled the room like she owned it. "What one table spends on a single meal here," she looked at his jacket, his shoes, his empty hands, "is more than your entire generation will ever earn." Someone near the window looked at their plate. A woman in pearls pressed her lips together. The old man stood completely still. "Filthy." The word landed in the room like something thrown. "Presumptuous. Embarrassing." She pushed the door open with one hand. January air rushed in, cold and immediate. "There are cafes down the street for people like you, people who know their place. Go find one." He stood at the open door. He looked at her once. The look lasted less than 2 seconds. Then he looked at the floor and walked out. The door swung shut. Diane smoothed her jacket, turned back to the room, and smiled, like she had just handled something efficiently. Brandon at the service station began a slow clap. One person near the front smiled. The room exhaled, and slowly, like a machine restarting, went back to its afternoon. Glasses lifted, conversations resumed, forks moved. Nobody thought about the old man again. Nobody except one person, a 20-year-old busboy named Diego Reyes, who stood at the back of the room and had not moved since the moment it started. His expression was not the expression of the room, it was something else entirely. But before we tell you what happened next, you need to know who that old man really was, because nothing that follows makes sense without it. His name was Walter Hargrove, and his story didn't start on Fifth Avenue. It started in 1952, in a small town in rural Tennessee, where he was born with nothing. He was born the youngest of 4 children, Harlan County, Tennessee, a house so small the 4 children shared one bedroom and called it normal because they had never known anything else. His father worked in the mine 6 days a week and came home gray with dust and too tired to speak. His mother took in laundry, ironed other people's shirts at a wooden table in the kitchen from 6 in the morning until her hands gave out. Some weeks there was enough, most weeks there wasn't. Walter learned early what hunger felt like. Not the hunger of a skipped meal, the hunger of not knowing when the next one was coming. The hunger that sits in your stomach and becomes something else over time. Something quiet, something permanent, something that either breaks a person or builds them into something unbreakable. It built Walter. He finished high school in 1970. There was no money for college. He knew that before he finished the first grade. He took whatever work came, farm work, loading docks, a year in a factory outside Nashville that paid just enough to keep him from going back to Harlan County. He was 20 years old when he walked into a restaurant kitchen the first time, not as a customer, as a dishwasher, the lowest position possible. But it was warm, and at the end of the shift, they fed the staff. For Walter Hargrove in 1972, that was enough. He met a young lady in 1974. Her name was Margaret Ellis. She was 22 years old, working the counter at a small diner 2 blocks from the restaurant where he washed dishes. She had brown eyes that paid attention to everything, a laugh that arrived without warning, and the particular quality of someone who sees people, really sees them, without needing them to perform. She saw Walter, not the dishwasher, not the boy from Harlan County, not the worn boots and the second-hand coat. Him. What he thought about, what he wanted, what was burning inside him that he hadn't yet found the words for. She was the first person in his life who asked him what he dreamed about, and meant it. He told her. He wanted to open a restaurant, not work in one, own one. A place where anyone who walked through the door was treated like they mattered. A place where the food was extraordinary, where nobody was made to feel small. She didn't laugh. She looked at him with those brown eyes that paid attention to everything, and she said, "Then that's what we're going to build. Not you, we." He married her in 1976, in a ceremony so small it fit in a courthouse hallway. No flowers, no reception, just 2 people and a promise. He put a thin gold band on her finger. She cried. He had never seen her cry before. He never forgot it. In 1978, Walter was 26 years old. He had been saving for 4 years. Every dollar beyond rent and food went into an envelope in the kitchen drawer. He had enough, barely, to lease a small space. Then the factory where Margaret worked closed with 2 weeks' notice. Then the landlord of their apartment raised the rent by 40%. Then the envelope in the kitchen drawer went to rent and food, and the pile of small emergencies that find people who have no margin for them. By November of 1978, The envelope was empty. By December, they had lost the apartment. They slept in his car for 11 days, a 1971 Chevrolet with a heater that worked on its good days and a back seat that fit 2 people if neither of them moved much. They parked on a street in Lower Manhattan. They did not tell anyone. There was nobody to tell. On the 9th day, Walter had not eaten since the previous morning. He walked 6 blocks because walking kept him warmer than sitting still. He passed a restaurant, small, nothing remarkable about it. A man was sweeping the steps outside. The man looked at Walter, at the coat, the boots, the particular face of someone who has been outside too long. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "You hungry?" Walter looked at him. "I'm fine," he said. The man looked at him for another moment. "Come inside," he said. "I've got soup on." Walter stood on the pavement. He wanted to say no. The pride that keeps people standing when everything else has gone, that pride was there, holding him on the pavement. But he was so hungry, and it was so cold, and the man's face had something in it that Walter had seen very rarely in his life. Just simple human kindness. No agenda, no judgment, no transaction. Just, "Come inside, I've got soup on." He went inside. The man fed him. Chicken soup, bread, a cup of coffee. He didn't ask Walter's name. He didn't ask what had happened. He didn't make him feel like a charity case or a project to tell someone later. He just fed him, like it was the most ordinary thing in the world.
Like Walter was exactly the kind of person who deserved to come in from the cold and sit down and eat. Walter sat at that table for 45 minutes. When he stood up to leave, he shook the man's hand. "Thank you," he said. "Come back any time," the man said. Walter walked back to the car. He sat in the passenger seat. Margaret was awake, wrapped in her coat. He told her what had happened. She listened. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "That's it, Walter." He looked at her. "That's the restaurant. The one we're going to build. The place where anyone can come in from the cold and sit down and be treated like they matter." He looked at her in the dark of that car on that street in Lower Manhattan, and he made her a promise. It took 4 more years. 4 more years of dishwashing and saving and starting over when something took the envelope money again. But in 1982, on the exact street in Lower Manhattan where they had slept in the car, Walter Hargrove signed a lease. A small space, 8 tables, a kitchen barely big enough for 2 people, second-hand equipment he had spent 6 months finding and repairing himself, chairs he had sanded and painted in the apartment on weekends. He worked 18 hours a day. Margaret worked beside him. She designed the menu. She trained the first 2 servers. She made sure every single person who walked through the door, regardless of what they looked like, regardless of what they ordered, regardless of whether they were celebrating something or just needed somewhere warm to sit, was treated like the most important guest in the room. Because that was the promise. That had always been the promise. The restaurant was not an overnight success. The first 3 months were terrifying. The 4th month, they broke even. The 5th month, a food writer came in on a Tuesday afternoon and ordered the soup. The review ran on a Sunday. By the end of that year, they had a waiting list. By the end of the following year, Walter signed the lease on the 2nd location. He called it Golden Spoon, because Margaret had said once, early in the struggling years, that someday they would eat with golden spoons, not as a symbol of wealth, as a symbol of the distance they had traveled. She laughed when he told her the name. That laugh, the one that arrived without warning. "Golden Spoon," she said. "Walter, that's either brilliant or ridiculous." "Both," he said. She laughed again. He would give everything he had ever built to hear that laugh one more time. The 2nd location opened in April 1983. Margaret was there for every day of the build. She chose the paint color for the walls. She trained the staff herself. She stood at the door on opening night in a blue dress she had saved 3 months to buy and welcomed every single guest personally. In June of 1983, Margaret told Walter she was tired. Not the tired of hard work, a different kind of tired. In August, the doctors gave it a name. In March of 1984, 11 months after the second location opened, Margaret Hargrove died. She was 32 years old. Walter was in the room. He was holding her hand. She had the gold ring on her finger, the thin one from the courthouse in 1976. In her last week, when she could still speak, she told him, "Don't stop. You don't dare stop. You build every single one, and you make sure anyone can walk through the door. Promise me." He promised her. He has kept that promise every day since. He took the ring from her finger, put it on a chain, and wore it around his neck every single day for 40 years. Through every lease signed, every location opened, every staff meeting and investor call and quarterly review, through 23 locations, 6 states, 4 decades, a company worth more than he could have imagined standing on that street in the cold in 1978. He wore the ring, and in his jacket pocket, a photograph, his mother, standing outside the house in Harlan County, squinting into the sun, her hands in her apron, the hands that ironed other people's shirts from 6 in the morning until they gave out. He carried her with him too, always.
Every year, once a year at each location, Walter Hargrove put on the worn jacket, the scuffed shoes, the open collar, and he walked into one of his own restaurants as nobody. Not as the owner, not as the man who built the company, not as the man whose name was on the building. As a stranger, an old man with nothing visible to recommend him. He sat at whatever table they gave him. He ordered simply, and he watched. He watched how the staff moved. He watched who they attended to and who they let wait. He watched the faces of the servers when they looked at him. He watched whether the person who greeted him at the door made him feel welcome or invisible. Because he needed to know, not from reports, not from numbers, not from what managers told him in quarterly reviews. He needed to feel it, the way a guest felt it, the way he had felt it on that street in 1978 when a man with a broom looked at him and said, "Come inside, I've got soup on." He needed to know that his restaurants were still that place, the place Margaret had described in the dark of a car on a cold street, the place where anyone could come in from the cold and be treated like they mattered. He had chosen the Fifth Avenue location this Sunday for a specific reason. The complaints had been building for months, 4 of them, then 6, then 9. Guests describing something cold in the welcome, something dismissive in the service, something that made them feel, and this was the word that appeared in 3 separate reviews, unwelcome. In a golden spoon, his golden spoon, on the street where he had slept in a car, where a stranger had fed him soup, where he had made a promise to a woman in a blue dress. He had to see it for himself, and now he had. He stood on Fifth Avenue, January. The cold was immediate and complete. He stood still for a moment. His hand moved the way it always moved in difficult moments, to his chest. His fingers found the chain through the fabric of his shirt. The ring, Margaret. He stood there on the pavement of the street where everything had started. 41 years ago, he had slept 50 yards from where he was standing. He had built a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars on this exact block, and they had just dragged him out of it. He looked up at the sky, gray, winter, New York. He almost smiled, not because it was funny, because Margaret would have had something to say about this, something that was either brilliant or ridiculous. He reached into his jacket pocket. His fingers touched the photograph, his mother's face, the apron, the squint, the hands. "I know, Mama,"
he said quietly to no one. "I know." He stood there in the cold, and then he heard the door.
The side door of the restaurant opened, not the main entrance, the service door around the edge of the building. A young man came out, 20 years old, black uniform, no coat, a takeaway cup held carefully in both hands. He looked up and down the pavement, saw the old man, walked toward him. He held out the cup. "Hot tea, sir," he said. "I'm sorry it took me a moment to find a lid." The old man looked at him, at the cup, at the young man's face. No coat in the January cold, steam rising from the cup, an expression that was not performing anything. Just a young man who had watched something happen inside that restaurant and had decided, quietly, privately, is no audience, what he was going to do about it. "Thank you," the old man said. He took the cup. The warmth of it went through his hands immediately. "What they did in there," Diego said. He stopped, started again. "It wasn't right, sir. It wasn't what this restaurant is supposed to be." The old man looked at him. "What is it supposed to be?" he said. Diego thought about it for a moment. "A place where anyone can walk through the door," he said, "and feel like they belong." The old man was very still. "How long have you worked here?" he said. 8 months, Diego said. "What's your name?" Diego Reyes." The old man nodded slowly. He looked at the cup in his hands. Then he looked at Diego. "You should go back inside," he said. "You'll get cold." "I'm fine," Diego said. "Go on," the old man said, not unkindly. "And Diego?" Diego stopped. "Thank you," Walter said, "for the tea and for what you said." Diego looked at him for a moment. Then he nodded and went back through the side door. The old man stood alone on the pavement. He held the cup with both hands. He looked up at the building, his name on the company, his promise on the wall, his wife's vision in every detail of the dining room she had never lived to see finished. He reached into his jacket pocket, took out his phone, dialed. It rang twice. "James," he said, "I'm at the 5th and Meridian location." A pause. "I need you here." Another pause. "Now, please." He ended the call. He finished the tea, and he waited. He was very good at waiting. At 2:29 p.m., a black car pulled up outside Golden Spoon. James Calloway stepped out first, 44 years old, regional director, sharp suit, no tie, the kind of man who moves through rooms like they were built for him. 2 people behind him, both in dark coats, both moving with purpose. They walked toward the entrance. Inside the restaurant, Diego was resetting a table near the window. He saw the car. He saw the 3 people walking toward the door with the particular energy of people who are arriving to handle something. He moved to the entrance and held the door open. James Calloway looked at him as he passed. Then he stopped. "Is Mr. Hargrove still outside?" he said. Diego stared at him. "The old man?" he said. "He was just—" He turned, and Walter Hargrove was walking up the front steps. Same worn jacket, same scuffed shoes, same open collar. Except now, he was walking through the front door of his own restaurant, the door his name was on, the door on the street where he had slept in a car, the door Margaret had stood beside in a blue dress and welcomed guests on opening night. He walked through it without hurrying, without announcement, without a single word. Diego held the door. Their eyes met for just a moment as Walter passed. The old man gave the smallest nod. Diego stood very still. Something was happening. He didn't know what yet, but something was happening. The dining room did not notice them at first. Then it did. Diane Carver saw James Calloway from across the room. Her expression shifted. James Calloway did not come to locations unannounced. He did not bring 2 people with him when he did. She walked toward him. Her smile was the professional smile of someone preparing to manage a situation. Then she saw who was walking beside him.
The old man, the worn jacket, the scuffed shoes, the open collar, walking back into the room she had dragged him out of 40 minutes ago, walking beside the regional director, as if her smile stopped working. James Calloway did not speak to her. He looked at Walter. Walter looked at the room. The food journalist by the window had her pen in her hand. The woman in pearls had gone very still. Several tables had quietly stopped eating. Walter walked to the center of the dining room. He did not raise his voice. He did not perform. He simply stood there. And somehow, the way a room responds to authority it didn't know was in the room, everyone looked at him. "My name is Walter Hargrove," he said, quietly, clearly. "I own this restaurant." The room did not make a sound. "I own all 23 of them." Diane Carver's hand went to the edge of the nearest table. Brandon, at the service station, had gone completely white. "I came here today," he said, "the same way I come to every location, every year, to sit in the room and understand what my guests experience when they walk through that door." He paused. "Today, I was seated at the worst table in the restaurant. Nobody moved. I waited 20 minutes for water that never came." Brandon looked at the floor. "And then I was told," he paused, "that one table spends on a meal here is more than my entire generation will ever earn." The room was so quiet you could hear the candles. "And I was called filthy." He let that word sit in the room. "And I was dragged, physically, through this dining room." He looked at Diane. She looked back at him. Her face had gone the color of the tablecloth behind her. In front of every person in this room. He looked around at those people, at the couples, the business lunches, the family in the corner, the journalist by the window who was writing very quickly. "I built this company on one promise." He reached into his collar, took out the chain. The ring caught the light. "My wife made me promise her, before she died, that anyone could walk through this door." His voice did not break, but it was close. "Anyone, regardless of what they looked like, regardless of what they were wearing, regardless of whether they arrived in a car or on foot or from a bench on the street." He looked at the ring for a moment. Then he tucked it back under his shirt. He looked at James Calloway. "Effective immediately," he said. James nodded. Walter looked at Diane. "You're done here." He looked at Brandon. "Both of you." Diane opened her mouth. Walter looked at her with an expression that closed it again. "I was homeless on this street," he said quietly, 41 years ago. A man I had never met brought my soup. He didn't ask my name. He didn't ask what I was wearing. He just brought me inside." He looked at her steadily. "That is why this restaurant exists. That is the only reason it exists. And you took that, and you used it to humiliate someone." He straightened. "We're done."
The room was still. Walter looked across the restaurant. Diego was at the back, standing beside a table he had been resetting when the world changed. He had not moved. His expression was the expression of someone who is trying to understand what they are in the middle of. "James," Walter said, "the young man who brought the tea." James looked over at Diego. Diego looked back. "His name is Diego Reyes, busboy, 8 months, no complaints, 3 floor commendations." Walter nodded. "Is he in school?" "City College, Business Administration, 2nd year." Walter was quiet for a moment. Then he looked directly at Diego. "Come here, son." Diego walked across the restaurant, past every table, past every face watching him. He stopped in front of Walter Hargrove. He looked at the old man, the worn jacket, the scuffed shoes, the chain just visible at the collar, and something connected in him. "You brought me tea," Walter said. "Yes, sir." "Why?" Diego didn't hesitate. "Because you were cold," he said.
and what happened to you in there wasn't right. Walter looked at him for a long moment. What year are you in school? Second year. How are you paying for it? This job, Diego said, and a small scholarship. Walter nodded slowly. You won't need the scholarship anymore, he said. Diego stared at him. I'm going to fund the rest of your education, every semester, every year, until you're done. The room had not moved. And when you graduate, Walter said, come and find me. There will be a place for you in this company, a real one, built for someone with your character. Diego looked at him. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. Sir, Diego said, I only brought you tea. Walter Hargrove looked at this 20-year-old boy standing in the middle of his restaurant, and he thought about a man with a broom on a cold street in 1978 who had brought him soup, who hadn't asked his name, who had just looked at a hungry man in the cold and done the only decent thing. No, Walter said softly. You saw a person when no one else in this room did. He put his hand briefly on Diego's shoulder. That matters more than you know. Diane Carver and Brandon were gone by 3 p.m. The food journalist's piece ran 4 days later. Not a review, a story, the full story, every word of what happened in that dining room on a Sunday afternoon in January. It was read by 4 million people in the first 48 hours. By the end of the week, it had been shared in 31 countries. The comments were not about the food. They were about the ring on the chain. They were about Margaret. They were about a man with a broom on a cold street in 1978 who brought him soup, who hadn't asked his name, who had just looked at a hungry man in the cold and done the only decent thing. Walter did not give interviews. He released one statement, 3 sentences. Golden Spoon was built on a promise. That promise is that anyone can walk through our door. We fell short of that promise last Sunday, and I am sorry. That was all. The 5th and Meridian location closed for 2 weeks. Every member of staff attended a full retraining. The hostess, who had seated Walter at the worst table, kept her job. She asked to speak with Walter directly. He agreed. She told him she was ashamed. He told her shame was only useful if it changed something. She became, 18 months later, the most requested host in the building. A new branch manager was brought in from the company's best-performing location. Within a year, 5th and Meridian had the highest guest satisfaction score in the company's history. He graduated with honors. May, City College Gymnasium, a Tuesday morning. Bachelor of Business Administration. He was the first person in his family to hold a degree. His mother flew in from out of state. His 2 younger sisters sat beside her. His grandmother wore her best dress, and 3 rows back, in a worn jacket, Walter Hargrove. Diego found him afterward in the crowd. They shook hands. You came, Diego said. I said I would, Walter said. He handed him an envelope. Diego opened it. A letter. Director of Guest Experience, Hargrove & Sons Fine Dining, reporting to the executive office, not one branch, the whole company. Diego read it twice. Then he looked up. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Walter said. They stood in the crowd of graduates and families and the particular noise of a day when something ends and something begins. Why me? Diego said. There are people with years of... I know, Walter said. He looked at Diego steadily. Experience teaches people what to do. Character teaches them why. He reached up briefly and touched the chain at his collar. I watched you go out a side door into the cold with a cup of tea for a stranger who couldn't do a single thing for you. He paused. You didn't do it because someone was watching. You did it because it was the right thing to do. His voice was quiet. My wife would have liked you very much. Diego looked at the old man, at the worn jacket, the scuffed shoes, the chain at the collar, and something connected in him. Was she the one? Diego said. The one you built it for? Walter looked at him for a moment.
She was the one who showed me what it was supposed to be, he said. A pause. The rest was just work. He straightened his jacket. Come in Monday. We have a lot to do. Stay with this story for a moment, because there are layers to it that I don't want you to miss. The obvious lesson is the one everyone takes home. Don't judge people by what they're wearing. The man in the worn jacket might own the building. That lesson is real. Write it down if you work in any kind of service. But that is not the deepest lesson. The deepest lesson is Walter, a man who grew up with nothing, who was hungry, who was cold, who slept in a car on a street in Manhattan with everything gone, and was saved, not by a program, not by a system, not by anything institutional or organized or official, by a man with a broom, who looked at him and said, "Come inside, I've got soup on." That one moment, that one unremarkable, ordinary, utterly human moment became the foundation of a company, became the promise on the wall, became the reason 23 restaurants exist, became the reason Walter put on worn clothes every year and walked into his own buildings to feel what a forgotten person feels, because he never forgot what it felt like to be standing in the cold, invisible, and have one person see you. That is the real story, not the justice, not the firing, not the reveal. The soup in 1978 from a stranger who asked nothing, who wanted nothing, who just looked at a hungry man in the cold and did the only decent thing. Think about the power of that. One bowl of soup changed a life, built a company, funded a young man's education 45 years later. Think about what that means for the ordinary moments of your own life, the stranger you held the door for, the colleague you covered for without being asked, the person in the cold you stopped to ask if they were all right. You have no idea what those moments build. You have no idea whose life you are in the middle of changing with something as simple and as enormous as a bowl of soup or a cup of tea. Stories like this one remind us of something we already know but sometimes forget, that how you treat people, all people, every person, the one in the expensive suit and the one in the worn jacket, is the truest thing about you. Not your performance, not your title, not what you do when the right people are watching. What you do when nobody is watching, when there is nothing to gain, when the person in front of you looks like someone the rest of the room has already decided doesn't matter. That is the moment that reveals everything. Diane failed it. Brandon failed it. Diego passed it without even knowing he was being tested, because that is what integrity actually looks like. Now, before you go, I want to hear from you. Do you think Walter was right to fire them on the spot, or do you think they deserved a second chance? Tell me in the comments. I genuinely want to know. And tell me this, has there ever been a moment in your life when one small act of kindness from a stranger changed something for you? A bowl of soup, a cup of tea, a door held open, a moment when someone saw you when nobody else did. Tell me about it. I read every single comment. Every one. If this story moved you, please like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. Hit the button, turn on notifications, because the next story is already coming and you don't want to miss it. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.